All right, welcome back to Resource Real Talk about Louisville real estate. I am your host, Jay Pitts. I am joined by fellow associate here at Remax Premier Properties with me, Mr. Ian Hooper.
Hey, everybody.
Ian, welcome. We are here for season 3, episode 8, after a slight hiatus. I think the last time you heard from us here at Resource was back in April. Obviously, we've been dealing with a nationwide pandemic and all that that entails, and really just decided to take a little time off and focus on the agents in our office and our families and that kind of thing. But we're proud to be back with you. Obviously, a lot of things have come and gone, a lot of happenings. We are a nation that finds itself in the midst of a serious conversation right now, and that's going to be the topic of today's conversation. I asked Ian because of a conversation he and I had just here recently after he was recently featured in Inman magazine. Those of you that are not familiar with Inman, it is a trade publication for mostly residential real estate professionals, but surrounding the topic of race and racism in the United States and housing. Ian was quoted and made some very cogent points about the state of how race affects housing. And I think that really, after my conversation with Ian, we come to the conclusion that we're not sure that the average real estate professional in our market understands just the impact that certain policies and procedures in the past and how they have affected how we exist. So Ian, I'm not gonna overshare or bury the lead. I definitely want you to share with our audience your thoughts on the topic, but I understand that you also have a lot of research on the topic as well.
Yes, thanks, Jay. Hi, everybody. I'm Ian Hooper. I have done some research, and questions about race have been, it's a part of who I am. And I think that is one of the things I want to talk about before we even talk about data that is important here in our market in Louisville. I want to let people know that I understand how hard it is to talk about race and to talk about racism. I'm biracial. My father was black. My mother was white. And I grew up with this interesting conflict within myself. So much of what I did socially would be considered white. But there were aspects of my life, and even today, and there are aspects of in my normal life, my entire life, including today, where I am clearly aware that I'm the only black person in the room, and as I think about how I was picked to be interviewed by Inman. It wasn't because I'm some industry know-it-all or some industry guru. I have a feeling it's because she searched top producing teams, and I was the first black face she came to on a top producing team's website. It's just what I think, because there would have been no other reason for the reporter to call me, other than some other more established agents in town, black agents in town. So I'm aware of this, but I'm also aware that when I am with black folks, whether it is professionally or socially or whatever, there is a connection, but then there's also this inner conflict with me, just because of the way I was raised. And so I know if that's in me, then there's also questions for other people that don't have any connection between black and white. Either they're white and they don't really understand the black experience, or they're black and they don't really understand the white experience. I have this interesting view of both, but then at times I wonder if I actually even understand either. But because my mom was an educator both my parents were educators, but my mom was the multicultural education specialist for JCPS. And her job was to teach teachers how to teach kids about people that look different than them. To oversimplify what her job was for like 20 years of my life. to make sure that teachers weren't just teaching about old dead white guys when there were plenty of black people and plenty of people from other ethnicities. It wasn't just about white and black. Her job started out to be all about white and black, but it became so much more than that. But I think what we're talking about right now is white and black. We're talking about, so I will talk about black. And I understand that it may not be, some people may not find it politically correct for me to say black. Some people may be confused why I'm not saying African American, or some people may have been recently conditioned to use the term people of color. But I'm talking about black people. I'm talking about people who, if we go back a couple of generations, 2 or 3 generations, their ancestors were slaves in the United States. I'm not talking about people that have come to the United States by choice in the last 100 years, 50 years, 20 years. I'm talking about people whose ancestors were, if you go back far enough, were brought to the United States before it was even the United States on boats against their own will. That's the people we're talking about.
Sure.
So my hope for what we can do, and we're going to talk for a few minutes today, 20, 30 minutes today. My hope is not that we can come up with a solution or an answer, but my hope is that folks that are listening to this, and I know it'll mostly be real estate professionals, can maybe learn something, find a couple of new resources, and I have a few to share. One really, really awesome one that was created in Louisville about Louisville, and can maybe find it in themselves to learn about other people. You know, we have, with our increase of online leads and Zillow leads and Realtor.com leads or whatever, we don't really have much control over who we end up on the other end of on the other line of the phone with. But we do have a choice of which one of those internet leads we engage the most with, and which one we dig into the most, and which one we educate through the deal, and which one we stick with and continue to follow up with, even if they're not qualified when we first meet them. We may not have a sphere of influence that's very multicultural at all. I mean, your sphere of influence may be all white. Your sphere of influence may be all black as a realtor. But, you know, one of the things that we can do as real estate professionals in this lane that we have, you know, I'm not downtown with a picket sign. I'm not. It's not what I'm choosing to do. But I have done some inner reflection over the last few weeks of where can I be the most use. And as a real estate professional, I can be the most use right here. And so we hear a lot about systemic racism, and people may not know what that means. So let's talk about what that means in terms of real estate. And I'm going to share my screen in a minute. In a minute. We are, excuse me.
Well, Ian, let me jump in right there. So I will say that, you know, I read the Inman piece, obviously, where you were interviewed and you gave your thoughts. And one thing for our audience, if you don't know Ian, you know, because most of our audience is Louisville real estate agents, right? And so if you don't have the pleasure of knowing Ian, if you haven't had the pleasure of working on the other side of a transaction with him, one thing I can tell you is that Ian is a very thoughtful individual. And so everything he's going to share with you today is, you know, his feelings from personal experience and from research he's done, and it's well thought out. I can tell you that. He and I have talked a little bit leading up to the call today. I try to be those same things, but I know that based on who I am and my history, that I haven't had the same experiences that Ian has had. So neither of us are claiming to be the resource, okay, or the person capable of analyzing where you may stand on these issues. But I think most thoughtful individuals, as a result of the protests we've seen in the last 2 weeks in the United States of America and all 50 states, and you know, the feelings and the passion that exists surrounding this issue, most of us have probably done some thoughtful introspection, right? And what I know is that I could never understand what Ian may go through in in his day-to-day world, he probably can't understand exactly where I could go through too, because we're two different people, but we can respect one another and each other's opinion. And part of the reason why I wanted, lend this platform to Ian and his voice is because I know he will bring you a thoughtful analysis of, how this has impacted the history that we cannot change, that we cannot erase, the things that have existed, okay, in our community, how it's affected what we see in Louisville today. Okay. And there's some specific things. And Ian, I don't want to jump ahead of you, but I know we're going to talk about the 9th Street divide, right? Yep. I know we're going to talk about segregation in today's community. Okay. And I think you've got some very interesting points to share on why that stuff exists. So I'll throw it back to you there, man. But I just definitely wanted to say that, this is not just something from the past. This is something that exists in our community today.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for bringing me back to where to where I needed to be. I went off, and thanks for bringing me back.
It's all right, man. It's all right.
No, it's perfect. So I don't believe that we would be in this situation that we are in the United States and in Louisville right now if we lived together.
Yeah.
But largely.
But we don't, do we?
Largely we don't. And we have some really beautiful data to show how we don't. There's a researcher, an activist in Louisville named Joshua Poe, P-O-E. You can Google him. You can look him up on Twitter. He has created this wonderful story map, and I'm going to share it really fast. Share screen.
So for those of you listening on iTunes or wherever you podcast from, okay, what Ian is doing is showing, sharing his screen, and I encourage you, if you typically consume this show via podcast, that you find us online. If you're a real estate agent and you're not a member of our private Facebook group, reach out to me. You know how to find me. I will add you, and I'd be more than happy to have you consume this episode specifically, okay, in video version, because there's going to be some really, really interesting visuals that are incredibly powerful and tell the story that Ian's about to share with you. So do that, but we'll do our best to also explain kind of the general kind of outline of what we're talking about.
Yes. So when we took our licensing exams, there were some terms that were talked about that weren't really gone. I did mine in an online course, so I'm sure some people maybe got a little bit better education into some of these terms than what I did, but they were just told to us as things that were discriminatory, against fair housing, and therefore bad, but not really explained to in depth. And the first one is redlining. And
which is a term we've heard a little bit in the last 2 weeks. It's kind of bubbled to the surface in the popular conversation, right? Like news and that kind of thing, right?
Yes. So this really wonderful website, this collection of maps, we can find it locally on our Logic Maps, ARC data maps. But if you Google redlining Louisville story map, Joshua Poe, or and we will provide a link in the
the link will be in the show notes, and it'll be shared in the comments of the video that when we share that as well.
Absolutely. So this gives an actual visual of 1937, I believe, map. 1930s. Let's just call it the 1930s map. It was created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Homeowners Loan Corporation, and this map was given to realtors and lenders so that they could understand what was considered the most desirable areas for purchasing property, selling property, and for lending money on properties. It's color-coded as such. Green is A. Now, some of you may be in the investment world, and you may have heard these letters too, A, B, C, and D, that still exist in common investment conversation, at least in this market. But this to me really exposes its
A property, B property, C property,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. But when those A, B, C, D, when that was created, it really meant something really specific. So A properties, B properties, C properties, and D properties. And if we're looking at this map here, the green properties are all on this eastern side of the map. The D properties are centrally located in west. The redlining, the red spots on the map are considered the worst properties. And we're going to, I'll read some specific descriptions here. And then let me zoom in. Hang on a second. Let me know if this is actually working. Is that zooming in for everyone?
Yeah. Yeah, I got you.
Cool. So I can't zoom in on the map itself, but as we look right here where so Louisville, folks, right here where my mouse is going down, this is Ninth Street, right in here.
Okay. So that's, west of 9th. You've heard it was west of 9th is a common, topic or phrase that you might hear in the real estate industry, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let me read some of the descriptions of some of these areas of what an A region would be.
Now, before you do that, Ian, real quick, I just want to underscore the Homeowners Loan Corporation, was established as a result of FDR's New Deal coming out of the Great Depression in 1933. Okay, so this is a federal organization aimed at, recovery and helping the economy recover from the Great Depression, and this is the result. Go ahead, Ian.
Yes. And so even though there were programs, the FHA loans and the VA loans and these were new things, and they were new opportunities. And yes, there would have been Black people who qualified for a VA loan, or there would have been Black people who qualified for first-time homebuyer opportunities. But because of this information, it was extremely difficult for Blacks to buy a property, and this is why. So properties that were listed as A, and I'm reading this out of this notes over here, the properties that were listed as A, first grade or A grade, were described as new and homogeneous, meaning everybody that lived there was the same. Quote, unquote, in demand and as residential locations in good times and bad. Homogeneous meant, quote, American businessman and professional men. Neighborhoods with Black or Jewish populations, or even those with the threat of infiltration of such populations, were not considered best or American. Now, as you can see, all of this is in the eastern part of the city. So this goes as far east. We can see Seneca Park over here. This is the Highlands. We don't go too much. The city didn't go much further east than that at this point. So all of the green is over here.
Yeah. So the East End, even in 1930s.
That's right. The second grade were still desirable neighborhoods that had reached their peak, but were expected to be stable for several more years. So that's the blue. So as we can see, we have still in the east, some down here in the south. I'm most interested in this blue area over here by Shawnee Park. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
Yeah, so west, as far west as you can go, essentially,
yes,
in the city, bordered by the Ohio River on the west side. And, anybody that's spent any time down there knows that, there's beautiful architecture, grand, Victorian Italianate designs. I mean, like massive homes down in this particular area. But even still, it's rated as second grade. Okay, by the time the 30s rolled around.
And we will explain to that, and I have some insight onto that as well. So third grade, neighborhoods were quote unquote definitely declining and characterized by expiring restrictions or lack of them, and infiltration by a lower grade population and the presence of influences which increase sales resistance. So when they say restrictions, it was still possible to put a deed restriction on who could purchase the property. So if you could sell a piece of property with a deed restriction that said a developer could develop a neighborhood, sell it to the original owner, the original inhabitant, and the deed could be restricted to say you could not sell this property to a Black person.
Incredible.
So some of these neighborhoods had those restrictions. So one of the characteristics of a C grade neighborhood area was expiring restrictions. So a lack of ability of the people that live there to keep the area homogeneous, as was described earlier.
So it's less desirable because graded as less desirable because the inability to remain homogeneous.
Yes. Now, there were some other things that when we look through some of these documents that show that are influences that increase sales resistance, like areas that have lots of saloons, as they call them, or areas that have industry, or areas that are near things that would be like up. One of the things that the track up here is that there's an amusement park there. Things that make noise, I mean, just like we would have now. But what we don't have now what we officially don't have now, what we don't legally have now, are deed restrictions that can
segregate based on race.
Yes. So now the bottom one is the fourth grade neighborhoods were defined as areas in which the things taking place in the C areas have already occurred. So the C areas are going down, and the D areas are at that point considered the bottom. These neighborhoods were described as, quote, the only hope is for demolition of these buildings and transition of the area into a business district, or this particular spot is a blight on the surrounding area. So those are the descriptions. Now, here's an interesting thing. If we look at some of these areas in the West that are, so if we look, let's talk about B15 and B16. So B15, we are near Shawnee Park. This is now currently in 2020 a predominantly Black neighborhood. Has been for my entire life. I'm 44. B16, same thing. Beautiful park right here, Parkway. A lot similar to what we have over here with Eastern Parkway and Shawnee Park, or Iroquois Park and New Cut Road and Southern Parkway. Very similar, except that this area over here is predominantly Black. We know that a home on Southern Parkway, on Southwestern Parkway, might look exactly like a home on Eastern Parkway.
It absolutely does.
Footprint the same age.
Architecture, age, construction, quality,
everything. Proximity to a beautiful park designed by Frederick Law Olmsted.
Yes. Same.
But the property value of a property near Shawnee Park is maybe a third of what the property value of a property near Cherokee Park, and maybe even less.
Maybe even more disparate.
Mm-hmm. So
why is that?
Here are some descriptions here. So if we describe the reason why B16, the negative thing with B16 is, and this is, I'm just going to pull it up.
Yeah.
So this is what accompanied this map. So this was a real map that was created by and that was created by people in our market. Comes with an explanation, and there are some names if you're interested. Well, if you're interested in who participated in creating this map, and you can pull this document up and look for yourself.
It was real estate agents, realtors, appraisers.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Those are the people that were consulted for creation of this, essentially engaged by the federal home loan or Homeowners Loan Corporation to provide an assessment of these areas. And this happened in multiple areas too, but I mean, this is Louisville that we're talking about. So let me ask you, what do they cite as the reason for Shawnee Park receiving was it a C grade or a B grade?
So Shawnee Park at this point was still a B grade, but this is why. So if we look at the Shawnee Park area, which is B15 right here.
Yeah.
The detrimental influences are that there is an amusement park, which was Fountain Ferry Park, a white-only amusement park that was operated 4 months out of the year, is on the western area of this. Now, this makes sense. 90% of the area was under 1 to 12 feet of water during the flood of 1937. Okay? But this was the first time flood waters had ever covered any part of that area. So that makes sense. And then if we have some other clarifying remarks here, it says along Broadway are many large 2-story old residences, some business houses on Market Street. Western Parkway contains some higher priced residences, and then stuff about the flood. Okay, so now let's look at this one right below it. So they've made a point to separate B15 and B16. 16 is not yellow yet, but
now it's an adjacent area too, so they're connected.
They are connected
geographically.
They're right. Yeah, sorry, I forget everybody's not looking. I mean, these are right next to each other.
And B16 is made up largely of what neighborhoods?
It's Chickasaw.
Chickasaw.
Basically.
Okay, which has proximity to another park.
Chickasaw Park. That's correct. So if we look at the Chickasaw neighborhood, which is, I mean, so the architecture is the same. It is just as close to the river as B15. Yep. There's actual riverfront property that's not parkland or golf course in Chickasaw.
Yep.
But they made a point to separate the two, and here is the main difference. The detrimental influence of the value to B16 is the close proximity of the Negro Park to the south.
Which is now known as Chickasaw Park. Not sure what the name was then, but
right. It was already called Chickasaw Park. So Shawnee Park was here, this large park, white park, little bitty park right here, Chickasaw Park. And the main differentiator between the value of the homes in B15 and B16 was the proximity to the black park.
So it's a reasonable assumption then, okay, if it's ranked a B, okay, and just going by, just going by their own criteria set forth in this assessment, right? The detrimental factors cited are the reasons why it didn't get a higher rating, whereas the positive factors are the reason why it didn't get a lower rating. Okay. So essentially, this is an A area, except for proximity to a largely black population.
According to the document
I think that's a fair assumption to make. I mean, obviously, this is 2020 and not 1937, so we can't ask these questions, but I think that's a fair assumption to make, right?
Yep, I do.
So, incredible. Okay, so to review, and I go back to just, and it's incredibly damning and almost unbelievable. I guess I shouldn't say unbelievable. There's been, numerous atrocities that we are aware of, so it shouldn't be unbelievable. But I mean, you can go back to pick an argument to make, right? Like outright saying that proximity to nearly all black communities is a detriment, but it also makes no mention, like in the A, no mention of women, only businessmen.
Yeah, right.
Right. I mean, there's the reference to homogenous and the likelihood to remain homogenous being a factor in what led to higher ratings. Then you go to the deed restriction issue, which is just outright unconstitutional at this point in time, in today's world. It's astounding, Ian. I mean, this is the kind of thing I think that a lot of people are blind to, that these types of things ever existed. They live in their bubble. We live in our bubble. We know that west of 9th Street is very different than east of 9th Street, but we don't know why. Okay, when you talk about systemic racism, when you talk about institutional racism, these are the institutions.
Yep.
that created segregation in our housing and our community.
And I want to read one more. I don't need to share my screen on this one though, because there's not really much to look at. But one of the documents, and this is folks that are local will understand. So Portland, which is in the northwest of the town, which was some of the original settlement of Louisville, or of the area that is now called Louisville. You know, it's a large portion, and it has a large of the area west of 9th Street. It is the portion that has the most white people still. And actually, let's do this. Let me share my screen and let's look at that, because that's,
Yeah, I think you should, because I think it's pretty telling.
hang on. I lost my ability to do that. Oh, there we go. So,
I can do it if you can't.
no, I got it. All right. So here we are. Let me compare. We're going to compare segregation. So this is the awesome thing about this map. And this is why Jay and I really want everyone to know about this. Mr. Poe did such a magnificent job of creating this wonderfully interactive document. So what we have here is a modern version of the map that we were looking at before. It has we have the same
AB
color
and,
code.
yeah,
with
A, B, C, and D ratings.
areas. Here we are, the B15, the B16 that we were just talking about over here in the west. Green areas in the east. And this is Portland right here. So let's look at this, but we can overlay current segregation data. So if we just slide this over, you see it's the same thing. We can still see the codes shining through. Now look over here on the in the legend.
Census tract.
It just tracks data. Black populations greater than 80%. So 80% and higher of these populations here are Black. This
And then
is
that slightly lighter shade of orange is, you know, basically 79%.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 80 to 98%. So, I mean, that's a 20% range, but still, I mean, it's virtually all 80%. All of the orange is 80% or greater.
But look what happens above this line right here, above Market Street. So here we are in Portland. In Portland, this area up here has stayed predominantly white, even as this whole area shifted from white, and remember, blue meant white, and when this original map was made, even though there's no racial designation to the color, but that is, we have
we do know that blue was predominantly
right,
and it received a B rating because of a homogeneous population.
Yeah.
Immediately to the east, the C becoming yellow meant slightly less white.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so red meant predominantly Black.
This turning yellow in the 30s and 40s would have meant that it was becoming less homogeneous or less white. But this just didn't change up here. Now, this is an interest. So why? How is that possible? Well, when we look at the explanation of what made why D13 was given its grade, and the grade then was, okay, so it was red. It was red. Favorable influences were good transportation, all city conveniences, schools, churches in the area, and also community business centers. So, you know, you think about it. You drive down Portland Avenue. I mean, there's like a little main street there in Portland. It's close to the water. It's close to, I'm assuming there were still streetcars going east and west and north and south at that point. So the detrimental influences, age of properties. I mean, that's my number one beef with Portland right now, is the houses are so daggone old.
Right.
Mixture of population. So that's number two, is that it's not homogeneous. No restrictions. So no one could tell. There was no way to keep people out. after mixture of population and no restriction, then the mention of the fact that Portland is 3 blocks away from the river, right after a flood. There are bars in the area, saloons in the area, and the majority was underwater in the 1937 flood. I don't know. I think if somebody writes this list, this is probably the number one thing, right? It should be the number one thing.
Sure.
But look, if we go down here, this gives some clarification. It says the Negro population is south of Main Street. Portland Avenue, Bank Street, and a portion northwest of 18th Street is the best part of the area. Portion shown as Portland, largely inhabited by people of Irish and German descent, white people. Original owners were thrifty, and in some instances have moved to better sections, but retain ownership of homes here. The approach to the better portion of area is through industrial and undesirable sections of the city. So this is huge. As people left this area, they didn't have to sell their homes. They were able to get loans, or they had cash and were able to purchase in other parts of town. They were able to keep these properties and become landlords and build wealth for their families.
Right.
And that is a huge difference with what happened in the rest of this area.
But the wealth, it makes an important distinction too. But the wealth created from property ownership there resided in other parts of the city. And if you look at the predominant population then, that remains, okay, but then the segregation that ensued, you could make the logical assumption that they moved east into more segregated communities and took that wealth with them.
Yep. Okay.
I mean, it's pretty, like this visual right here, Ian, for everyone that is not watching this. I mean, what you're seeing is a predominantly dark orange area west of 9th Street, south of Portland, okay, that represents, an 80 to 90% African-American population. Mm-hmm. You're looking at a swath in the middle of the city that represents mostly bordering the river, no residential units at all. Right. That is the central business district. And then immediately south of that, which is University of Louisville and other public lands. Mm-hmm. And then east of would you say about I-65? It's kind of like I-65 and east, a deep purple, which represents 80 to 90% white population.
Yep. Well, and so I've switched a little bit because that was just basically on areas that were segregated and the rate of segregation. But now if we just look at percentage of population by race, we still see it. So we have this area here is Portland. In the west, this D13 area north of Market Street, just like it said.
Yeah.
Is least populated by Black people in the West end. But we can see that it began when these folks were able to leave and keep ownership in their homes.
Yeah.
Now here's an interesting thing. So what happened here? And I don't have any evidence that says that this. Hang on, sorry, I know I'm clicking kind of crazy. Give me a second.
That's all right.
I know I don't have any evidence that says that says why B15 and B16 were different, but this is what we know. We know that these homes here are very well constructed.
Yes. If
you've spent any time down in here, you know that these homes they have big basements, and some of them are, they're nice bungalows and they're well constructed, and they're not, most of them are not falling down. They're not as old as the homes in Portland. Right, where it's built with brick foundation shotguns. Like we're talking about a completely different kind of housing style. And this brings us up the term blockbusting that we also learned when we got our real estate licenses that they didn't really explain either. And so potentially this is an area where this could have happened, and I'm sure someone can tell us for sure. I do not know this, but blockbusting can be defined or explained by if an investor or an agent, a salesperson, was able to either place a Black family in a neighborhood, like actually get them to close on a property in a neighborhood, or hire someone to pose as of someone in this neighborhood, like go for a walk, and hire a Black family to go for a walk down a street that was all white, and then approach the white families in the neighborhood and say, you better get out now because here they come. I can help you sell your house immediately for.
So a quick Google search defines the term, right? Multiple dictionary sites. The practice of persuading owners to sell property cheaply for fear that people of another race or class have begun moving into a neighborhood, thus profiting by reselling at a higher price. So I think that last, thus profiting part is a byline. The harm, I think, that was propagated by, unscrupulous real estate professionals was they go into neighborhoods, probably some graded, some that were beginning to become more homogenous, and took homeowners that had been in those areas for some time that preferred they stay homogenous and tried to incent them to leave. For fear of, downward pressure on property values. And you're right, Ian, like real estate school, man, this is like a 10-second conversation, right? It's like, block vesting, redlining, and steering, like, let's move on. Like, and I don't know that that's 100% intentional, but I think you're absolutely right. But not enough time is lent.
So here's the thing. So if you can convince someone that lives in this neighborhood to sell their home for cheap, and they can go buy a house anywhere. Other than there. According to this map, they can go anywhere. But according to this map, only a certain type of people certain types of people can't buy houses anywhere and are forced to buy in this one spot. Well, if they want a house, the demand for this population is great.
Artificially inflated.
Right. So they can convince this property, they can convince this seller to sell cheap to get out because their life was on the line.
Yeah.
And then because of this artificially inflated demand, they could pump up the price and sell to a Black family at a premium because they didn't have any other options. And that's criminal.
Yeah.
That's systemic racism. It's those types of things that have not, that the community hasn't recovered from. And so if we're talking about a family that then has this house that in the 30s and 40s overpaid for, I mean, what happens when you overpay for a house now and the market shifts? Well, you're underwater. And what can't you do with an underwater house? You can't sell it. And then you're stuck. And you can't fix it up when the roof leaks. And so here we are in this situation. These people were forced to purchase properties in this area, but they were not able to, because of the equity that they came into the homes with, they were not able to, in some cases, keep them up. And they lost them.
I mean, you can see and connect the dots, Ian, where this one action, okay, that starts where you're talking about the concept of blockbusting, for example. It doesn't just artificially inflate demand; it restricts supply.
Yep.
Okay. So if that's the foundation, the spiral, right, of negativity can ensue that is very challenging to recover from. And you might hear some people saying, okay, well, civil rights movement, if it's been 60 years and that kind of thing. But the truth is that here we sit in 2020, okay? And you need only look at the segregation tab on this to understand that as a community, we largely live in separate cities, right? We may be proximate to one another, but we don't live in the same city, right? you know, and this had to start somewhere, right? It had to start somewhere. So overpaying for a property, okay, leaves you less disposable income, okay, to handle unfortunate occurrences that come up in your life, death of a loved one, loss of an income, you know, a horrific accident, that kind of thing. You can't stomach those things. So what ends up happening? They end up foreclosing at higher rates. They get maintained less and property values go down. Investors come in and buy them cheap, turn, you know, owner occupied areas into predominantly rental areas. And it's the cycle perpetuates, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So one more tab I want to show. So we talk about, well, this was 1940, this was 1950. Well, guys, that's not even 100 years ago.
It's not.
It's not even 100 years ago. It's just a few generations away. It's just a few generations back. And that's not, you know, families that the most wealthy families built their wealth over multiple generations, hundreds of years, the most wealthy families. But we're talking about a population of our city and our country that was not able to do the traditional things, that has not been able to do the traditional wealth building activities because of practices like this. I mean, this map is proof of it.
Yeah.
And if the American dream was built on, the initial idea of the American dream was built on buying a home, this cut out a huge portion of our population who was recovering from and trying to come out of being slaves.
Yeah.
Slaves. 200 years ago.
Yeah.
So if this norm, so how could without, there have been laws that have said things are wrong, things should be different. Yes, but it has not changed practices. In some cases it has, but it hasn't. Well, what it hasn't done is it hasn't brought us together. I mean, look, here we are talking about segregation. We have, the deeper the color, the higher percentage of a black population, and the lighter the color, we have as low less than 12% everywhere over here. Look at this, except for a few spots: Newburgh, Buchel, Fern Creek.
You essentially. I mean, what's something you hear a lot from prospective buyers looking in Louisville? Where do they want to go? What end of town?
They want to be in the East. And sometimes all they say is, "I just don't want to be in the West." I hear that once a week. I don't
care where it is. I just don't want to go to the West End.
Yeah.
You do hear that. And you know what, that brings me to a question, Ian, because I want you to speak to it. Maybe it's not the best idea to share the screen now, because this was something you brought up in your Inman interview that I thought was incredibly powerful. And I think it's something that we hear in daily practice that I think a lot of our realtors in this community can relate to. You mentioned the request of people looking to rent to own, right? Now, you know, we're a fairly progressive company in terms of marketing, right? Like, we look at all sources of generating business, right? So we end up having conversations with people that are not necessarily referrals, maybe at a higher rate than other real estate folks, right? And then other real estate companies. There's a lot of people in the industry that only deal with folks that were referred to them by past clients, and they've been in the business for 30 years. We talk to a lot of internet leads. We talk to a lot of sign calls. And you said that you get a lot of questions from people asking about rent to own, and you believe, it said so in the article, you believe that relates to some of these you know, systemically racist concepts and constructs that existed. Give our audience the kind of short version on that, because I don't want to keep you all day, but
it's a hustle. It's a hustle,
right?
So when you rent to own, there's this, if a potential home buyer enters into agreement to rent to own, they are paying an inflated amount of rent for the promise or the hope that one day they will actually take possession of this property, deeded possession of this property, But in the meantime, they're not building any equity. They're just paying this inflated amount of rent. Now the investor may say, or the person who's doing the rent to own may say, well, yeah, you're going to pay extra rent. Market rent $750. You're going to pay $900, and I'll put the extra $150 in an account for you, and that'll be part of the purchase price. But I have spoken with enough investors, and then in enough investor webinars and read enough blog posts that really that investor would be perfectly happy for the buyer, the potential buyer, the lease, the tenant, to never actually purchase the property. And they'll just find somebody else to charge a rent-to-own fee, charge inflated rent, have the lease until that person decides that they don't want to live there anymore, or that they evict them, or whatever the deal is, and then they just do it again, And so the wealth stays with this person who most likely doesn't live in that neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, and so, I think it's important to acknowledge that in 2008, the SAFE Act was passed, making this en masse illegal, essentially. Businesses operating as banks, okay, essentially acquiring property to lease to own or contract for deeds, if you will, is another piece of terminology. It's not allowed to be done. I think you can do it up to 4 times, as long as you're not a professional dealing with a layperson. But the truth is that this, prior to 2008, there were people that existed solely to do just that. It was high rates of foreclosure, high rates of, eviction that came. It was very small rates of actually exercising the purchase option that existed. And there are still workarounds to this day. The people that want to do it, they find a way to do it. Fly below the radar, do it illegally, legally, with, operating in the gray or what have you. But this is a practice that was put into place because the lack of available credit to people of color, which is another form of systemic racism, right? And it comes from, literally, like, the color of the D portions of the map being red is the, genesis of the term redline. Okay, and redlining can be a number of things depending on what you're talking about. One of them meaning banks will absolutely not lend inside a red zone. Okay, and I think it's incredible that we're still having the conversations that surrounding issues that are remnants of these policies.
Well, let's show one more map, because that speaks exactly to what you just mentioned. So if we look at the mortgage data, all right, so here we are, the map that we keep going back to, the HOLC map. Now, what we're going to overlay are the percentage of mortgage denials per census tract from 2011 to 2013. The darker the color, the more denials. So percentage of denials
essentially
by application. So this is denials divided by applications. So 41 to 75% of mortgage applications were denied if it was this darkest color. And look where we are.
So, and this is not even, guys, this is not 1937 denials.
No, this is 2011.
This is 2011, as late as 2013 denials.
And so look where it's not.
So, yeah, no,
look
absolutely.
Where it is. Look where it is. And I know that I know I keep forgetting that everybody's not looking at this. So as I'm moving around to the areas that have populations that we saw earlier that have more Black people, there are more mortgage denials.
Well, and I think a couple of points, Ian. So let's think about what was happening in 2011.
Yep.
Okay. So Ian knows this. A lot of you listening and watching know this, that I got into real estate about 2000, full-time about 2000, beginning of 2008. Well, we know that was the dawn of the Great Recession, right? Foreclosures, highest levels they had ever been, and that lasted several years. Okay. By and large, I will say 2013 was the pure end for me in terms of foreclosure and mass. I didn't liquidate foreclosures very much starting in 2013, but 2012, it was still a substantial portion of my business. And I was one of the agents around town that sold more than anybody. And the majority of them, I will speak from personal experience because I don't have stats to quote, but I think it's fair to make the assumption that my experience was indicative of the situation. The majority of the foreclosures in this city were in the West End. Okay. So property values had declined. Okay. One of the, few times in history that property values year over year declined for a few years. And once in a lifetime investment opportunities existed, right? Okay. The majority of the opportunities were in areas that traditionally, and as evidenced by the data we've shown today, are African-American communities. Okay. Opportunities existed. Mortgages were applied for, and 41 to 75% of them were denied. Okay. For those areas, probably large in part for people in those areas who could have bought at historically low prices on the back of, a recession of the likes we hadn't seen since these policies were enacted in the 1930s. So sorely missed opportunity. And if you want to tell yourself that these are problems of decades gone by, you need to look no further than that right there. I think it's incredibly telling. Ian, you know me, I bought some property, right? I couldn't buy my own listings, but I knew, and I bought some property. And the properties I bought between 2011 and 2013 as investments are worth probably twice what I paid for them now. Yeah. 7 and 8 years later. Mm-hmm. So, an opportunity denied once again is pretty incredible. Anyway, you got anything to add to that?
No, I don't. I just changed the map one more time to show an income map. We kind of jumped to the mortgages and didn't talk about the incomes. And so if we're looking again at this map of segregation that we know is predominantly black on this left side of the screen and predominantly white on the right side of the screen, and then we look at the income disparity, this tells us another way to look at the segregation of our city.
Yeah. So you have what you were showing there, Ian, that last screen, and you don't have to bring it back up, but you had some moderate incomes on the far west of the city. Mm-hmm. Right? Areas that you can imagine were high income that still exist today, Cherokee Park area, like Indian Hills, those areas down along the river, those were then and are now the highest income areas, right? But, if you look today, you had moderate incomes to the west, those went away, okay, became low income areas as the segregation split, as you drove a wedge right down the middle, at 9th Street.
Yep.
So, it's just like there are so much evidence of what has happened in our own community. I hope as a result of this episode and watching and listening, I hope, number one, those that listen go back and watch, because I think the visual is stunning. If you don't have the opportunity to watch, go to the link, and literally this is an amazing interactive kind of experience, this map, to learn, and so many links to like supporting documentation, like you pulled up actual documents that were filed as a result of these policies being enacted. I hope you do that. But if you do nothing else but listen to this, I hope you have at least somewhat of a better understanding of why these universal truths that are present in our community exist. What was the genesis of them, and why do they still exist today? And maybe if you're of the opinion that these were yesterday's problems, that you understand that they are very real and they exist in very real ways in today's market. Yep. Ian, you got any closing thoughts, man?
echo exactly what you just said. These links that we're going to put in the episode notes, please look at them. There's going to be some stuff that if you were surprised that I brought up slavery in 2020, there's going to be a link to a New York Times piece about slavery and about its importance and how it relates today. Please look at that. Please look at this map and play with it and learn like Jay and I have. It's been really interesting and brought up a lot of conversations. If you're a broker or a mentor of younger agents, please talk to them about this stuff. If you have the opportunity, when you have the opportunity to educate a first-time home buyer about how it works, do it. Don't rely on the lender to do it, or don't rely on the Urban League to do it, or don't rely on their program at their work going to give them a $5,000 grant. Educate them, help them. You're the professional. We are the professionals in this industry. So guide the folks that don't look like you exactly as you would the folks that look just like you. You know, treat everybody like they're in your sphere of influence, and the world's different, period.
Yeah. Well, and I will say this, you hear, and it's an adage in the real estate industry, that the majority of your clients, this is with respect to age, the majority of your clients tend to be within 10 years above and below your current age. That's a way of saying that people like to do business with real estate agents that are similar to them. That's a way of saying that. But it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. And I think it's probably true that the majority of white real estate agents' clients are white people. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be that way. And maybe it's just because, like you said, we don't live together because we don't understand each other, right? So take the opportunity to understand someone, right, that may not look like you, right? And afford them the professionalism, the credibility that you have. But you know what? The credibility isn't there unless you take the time to learn. So I hope what Ian has shared with you today resonates. I hope it piques some curiosity if you've not previously had that, and you take these resources and learn a little bit more. I know that I have learned a lot. And these concepts are something that I was somewhat aware of, but I've learned all the same. So I really appreciate your time today, Ian, man. Appreciate you taking the time to speak to the folks. I think this was an amazing first episode back after a hiatus. I intend to continue to bring you new episodes weekly going forward. But, I just want to give my sincere thanks and appreciation for you, teaching all of us. So with that, this is Resource, Real Talk About Louisville Real Estate. I'm Jay Pitts for Ian Hooper, sir. Thank you once again. We'll see you next week.
Peace.